Hello and welcome to the Metaverse Insiders interview series. My name is Josh, and in today's episode, we interview the Chief Product Officer at Aviva, Robert McGreevy, discussing the key elements of the industrial metaverse. Thank you very much for joining us today, Rob. Really appreciate your time. So, to start off our conversation, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and what it is that you do at Aviva?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Rob McGreevy. I am the Chief Product Officer for Aviva. And so I've been with the group here for, 15, 16 years, something like that, and spent the last almost 30, it sounds old, but the last 30 in the industrial manufacturing and critical infrastructure market. My whole career has been software in this space. My job at Aviva as Chief Product Officer is to look at the investment direction for the business. Where do we spend our money on our technology? We have an eye on kind of where the world's headed, where the market's headed, and then we match that up with our R&D spend that basically turns into the software that we build and deliver across the markets we serve. That's pretty much the job.
Fantastic. Sounds really interesting. So, back in December, we actually spoke to Andrew McCloskey, the past CTO of Aviva, and that was a very fruitful conversation concerning the industrial metaverse. I personally believe that this is one of the more important aspects of the metaverse going forth. So, could you walk us through some projects or some new endeavors that you're currently working towards in lieu of making the industrial metaverse go full throttle?
Sure. So there's a couple of key elements of the industrial metaverse and what we've been working on. Some of these go back, 20, 30 years, to be honest. But in earnest, we've been working on this, I would say, really in earnest in the last 12 years. But the first project that sort of lays the foundation for all things metaverse is the concept of a digital twin, or the idea that you have all sorts of different data, industrial data, that transcends all disciplines of the design, build, operate, maintain lifecycle in industrial. So this includes things like high fidelity process production data, like temperatures, flow rates, pressures. It includes the definitional elements of critical assets like equipment, conveyor systems, boilers, offshore oil rigs, all the things that you would sort of expect, along with a lot of the supporting, I'll just call it IT data. So we really see this like convergence of the data that's required to inform on and almost become like the anatomy, if you like, of the metaverse. And that includes engineering data, operational data, and then IT data, like ET, IT, OT, if you want to pick the latest sort of fashionable vernacular, I guess. So part one of this headline is that the digital twin, which is really the basis of the data that makes up the foundational elements of the metaverse, is what we've been spending a lot of time and energy on. So that's sort of one part of it. I think, and one project, I would say that, and frankly, nearly every customer that we have is participating at that level. Second thing that we've done in the metaverse is, I would say, we look at the behavioral aspects. And this is like, if you think about industrial manufacturing, where they're making stuff, or you're building stuff, or you're producing power or fresh water, that sort of requires the models or the behavioral aspects of the digital twin. It basically becomes the verbs or the action items that sit inside the metaverse of how we do a fill, a finish, a product changeover, a production schedule, the actual production of making finished goods or finished products. And that's another part of what we would describe as a key element of the metaverse. It's like it's like the behavioral pieces of it. So one piece is data in context. The other piece is then the sort of operational components that make up the actions that occur, in situ, like in the field of industrial manufacturing infrastructure. And I would say the third piece is the experience. And this is the one that most people gravitate towards. That's the visual. How do I actually experience the metaverse? And that can be, on tablets and handheld devices in the forms of augmented reality. It certainly can be large intergalactic Super Bowl TV screens like we've seen at Panorama, where it's literally a layout of a physical control room. Or, of course, it's the headsets, the fully immersive virtual reality headsets, which, we've been deploying those for at least a decade, if not longer. Mostly those for training. Mostly the augmented is in situ, like in the production environment, in the field. And then the traditional, I would say, screen-based laptops, control centers, et cetera, for experiencing the metaverse. We've been doing that, I would say, even longer. So that's really the three pieces of what we see. And we've got customers and partners that we've been working on in all of those across nearly every industry. So those are really the three. I know it's a long-winded answer, but those are really the three sort of key projects and pieces that we see that make up this sort of industrial metaverse. And then, of course, that enables all sorts of net new use cases that, frankly, weren't possible. When you look at this over the last 5 or 10 years, new use cases like in just collaboration, in situ collaboration, where we can have remote field workers connected in the same digital space as experts that may be sitting in a network operations center, as an example. So super exciting stuff and lots of different vectors, I would say, of engagement that we've been doing in the customer and in the market at large.
Well, could you potentially give us a rundown, some of the partners that you're currently working with?
Yeah, sure. So we obviously work with the hyperscalers. Microsoft, we've done quite a bit of work with Microsoft, both on the data side, leveraging some of the critical infrastructure that they provide on Azure, as well as their visual rendering tools, right? So think in terms of the client side, 3D rendering, things like that. We've also done similar work with Amazon and AWS for some of their, I would say, related technologies. So that's on the sort of the pure tech side. Given the fact that the digital twin itself and the elements of metaverse, by definition, federate different systems, we also work with a number of partners that sort of have plugins for different parts of like work processing, ticketing systems, mobile operator rounds, different forms of analytics and AI partners. So part of our strategy in this is knowing that, look, the metaverse is an amalgamation of lots of different systems and sources. So we have tech partners beyond like Microsoft, Amazon, that sort of fill out things like analytics that's provided and or sort of extensions of what we see in that space. And then I would say on the sort of data side, boy, the number of like partners and vendors is even more expansive. I mean, it's all the automation and controls vendors, so like the Siemens, the Rockwells, the Honeywells, et cetera, that sort of make up the automation and controls environment that feed that sort of digital twin, that's sort of the basis of that sort of data model that we have. So look at the partners that we've worked with, varies from hyperscalers to, I would say, more boutique, specialized tech companies that sort of have plugins that extend our platform, if you like. And then a lot of the base level automation and controls vendors that sort of make up the sensing side of what sort of sits in the industrial metaverse.
Well, thank you, Rob. So you've obviously worked with a lot of different industries in the space. Would you say that there are any industries at the moment which are currently leading the charge in terms of setting standards, or say allowing the other industries to reap the benefits from their success in trialing these new systems?
Yeah, I think a couple come to mind. I would say the ones that have, I would say, advanced the most in terms of like fully immersive environments is in the heavy process industries like oil and gas and chemicals, where you need to train operators and personnel on fairly complicated things for safety reliability reasons. So that's probably the first step, and that's where we really cut our teeth in terms of this. We provide a fully immersive operator training system, or what we call an OTS, that allows people to essentially simulate chemical and refining processes in a classroom style, where someone puts a headset on and they can go through and put on gloves, figure out how to put out a fire, how do I change, how do I close certain valves and things off. And so that really was the oil and gas, chemical, or what we call heavy process industries. And they made early investments in that because of, well, frankly, what was at stake. And the businesses could afford those types of configurations. So we still see that continuing. Is certainly more, I would say, investment and uptake in the space of operator training and certification systems that are based on this sort of environment and heavy process. More interesting has been a lot of the augmented reality and in situ instructions that we see with field workers. And that one actually transcends a lot of the renewable markets. So where you have highly distributed assets like solar arrays, wind farms, and other sort of alternative energy sources, that sort of necessitates a different set of field workers that are highly distributed. And with that comes this need to sort of provide digital technologies in the field in situ, and the ability to connect those remote workers back to like central expertise, right, in a central network operating center. So that's probably the second, I would say, the renewables or the energy sector is another that has taken advantage of this technology. And the third one, I think it's more emerging, is the ones that have dispatched a lot of labor. in highly distributed plants. So this is like, think food bev, think CPG, fast moving consumer. These where you've got a lot of, like, companies will have hundreds of plants distributed around the population, basically, because they're providing food or goods that are typically co-located with people in large populations. And what happens there is there's a lot of workforce needs. And with the way the world has been, people don't stay in jobs as long. There's more transient workers. There's also this graying or aging of the workforce. And that's sort of necessitated digitizing it, like basically tribal knowledge of how to do work. So instead of training people in a protracted, like 2 or 3 month cycle, they want to provide in situ instructions on how to perform work in the field. And so we see food bev companies, for example, that have, let's say, complex machine setups, digitizing that and providing it in, by using tablets and phones to say, hey, this is how you perform a product changeover in the field. This is where the piece of equipment is. These are the steps that you need to take. And here are the sort of digitized instructions that you do, all sort of in this immersive environment. And it puts together the data piece of that digital twin, because there's a physical asset that has to be operated on or changed or manipulated. There's all the sensing data that comes with it. There's the instructions on how to do it, right? The verbs or action items, if you like, that we talked about earlier around that hemisphere of the digital twin that is the behavioral piece. And then there's the experience that the operator has. Like in this case, it's a tablet or a phone. I'm pointing it at a piece of equipment and say, yeah, that's the thing. Here's how you go and make the thing do the things you need it to do, right? So whether it's a case packer, a palletizer, a blender, a mixer, all those kind of things. So, kind of rewinding the question back, I'd say the heavy process industries were the first to adopt it because they could afford it. They had the largest need. I would say the energy sector is adopting it as well as some of the fast-moving consumer goods or hybrid industries. And what really, I think, made this more adoptable across those other industries is the cost complexity. It's now a lot cheaper, more cost-effective to deploy this. And frankly, the necessity of deploying this tech is quite high. Why? Because of the workforce dynamics that we talked about earlier and some of the changes that are occurring in the industry.
Brilliant. It's quite interesting that you say that. I always find it very interesting to understand all the different industries that are currently working in this area. And quite often it's overlooked that there are mega corporations, especially in the industrial sector, which are knee-deep in the metaverse. Most people tend to just gravitate towards user experience like games or socials, so it's very nice to see this perspective. I find it quite refreshing. So just to elaborate on that slightly, what's some of the major challenges associated with helping facilitate this movement?
Are there any challenges? Yeah, I mean, of course. I would say, there's a couple different dimensions. That one is the tech challenge. Just to make this stuff work technologically, it's complicated. The amount of domain specificity that's required is super important. Like looking at a boiler, a case packer, a palletizer, a chemical process, the management of a grid that's made up of intermittent power producing sources like solar and wind mixed in with traditional power. That's just it's a diabolically complicated environment to amalgamate and bring these systems and sources together. So that's, I would say, one challenge. And luckily for us, we've got a 55-year history like doing this stuff. Like we've been around a long time, and so the good news for us is we know how to amalgamate these systems and sources, but it's still a challenge. The other piece of this is, and there's other tech challenges, by the way. Cyber comes to mind, reliability comes to mind. Kind of balancing priorities around, cloud, what should be in the cloud versus what should be on-prem or at the edge. But the other big piece is just, it's the human side of it. It's the change management side, like the way in which people perform work is changing. And that just has a huge change management piece. So, even though we've got a lot of tech that's out there and able to solve these problems, but changing the way an organization, onboards people, right? Trains people, gets them acclimated to using this technology. That's another piece of this equation that's I would say, quite a bit of a challenge for the industry at large is how do we train people and get them used to using this technology, as opposed to the old way where I'm going to shadow the maintenance manager or maintenance operator for 3 months, and that's how I'm going to learn the job. Whereas now we're saying, nope, here's on the job, here's your tablet, let's go. here's how you perform rounds in the field. Here's how you do a steam trap inspection. Here's how you do a product changeover. That's a very different sort of mindset, not only for the workers, but also for the organization at large. So I would say challenge-wise, there's certainly a technology pillar of challenges like that sort of cluster, if you like, of things like cybersecurity and technology and domain expertise that's manifest in this challenge to move to a metaverse. And then the human side of it. How do we change people's hearts and minds? How do we sort of operate, and how do we just navigate the human side of this thing? So those are probably the two hemispheres that most come to mind. There obviously are standards, like can we adopt global standards on this? There's also a lot of very interesting and tricky things that will come up that are a bit more, I would say, on the fringe. But you have topics like work councils that sort of get involved, or labor unions that have implications for this, because you're starting to digitize work, and so there's very interesting country-specific and even industry-specific nuances that you have to deal with as we look at moving all this stuff forward.
Of course. Obviously, there are going to be many hurdles in making this a mainstream phenomenon, but I know it's definitely going to be highly prolific once it does become a reality. Well, that's a wrap for part 1 of our conversation with Rob McGreevy, the Chief Product Officer at Aviva. Be sure to stay tuned for weekly updates in the industry and content covering all things Metaverse. Follow the Metaverse Insider on Twitter and LinkedIn, and visit metaverseinsider.tech for all our content. Thank you for joining us, and until next time.